Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
We find ourselves just hours away from the beginning of our Passover celebrations, marking our people's journey from oppression in Mitzrayim, literally the narrow place, to liberation in a land flowing with milk and honey. At the center of our Seders this weekend will be the Magid, the telling of this story that has for many Jews become the central story of our people and our tradition. It is the story that we tell year after year after year. We accompany this story with symbols and rituals of all kinds to bring the story to life so that we feel like we are not only telling the story, but that we are actually living it out. Mishnah Pesachim makes this clear. B'chol dor vador, these were the words we just sang. B'chol dor vador, in each and every generation, a person must view themselves as though they personally left Egypt. As it is stated, and you shall tell your children on that day, saying, it is because of this which the Lord did for me when I came forth out of Egypt. Everything we do at the Seder is to try to make us feel like we were actually there. It is not enough for us to talk about the tears of our ancestors. We must taste it, taste the salt water. We can't just imagine the bitterness that Pharaoh treated our ancestors with. We ourselves must taste that bitterness. And we can't only think about the mortar that our ancestors used to build tall palaces and pyramids to Pharaoh. We have to recreate our own mortar. This time it's pretty tasty with apples and nuts and all the works. The telling of the story is supposed to be more than just a telling. It's supposed to bring us into the story ourselves. And yet, the text of the story is important. Now, if you've already been preparing to lead your Seder tonight, or if you remember from previous years, you'll know that the story in the HaGadol, no matter what version you use, is not the plain text that we find in Exodus. Within the HaGadol is a telling of the text from our Torah. We read about several influential rabbis sitting around together hundreds of years after the events of Exodus, remembering the story and telling it to their students. So already, we are getting a secondhand account of the Exodus story from these rabbis. It is lifting up the parts of the story that they think are the most important, the components that most fully express our values. Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, Zichrono Livracha, wrote that to be a Jew is to know that the task of memory is more important than history. Memory is more important than history. Much has been written about the historicity of the Exodus story, considering whether or not each of the events of our story actually happened. And there is so much to be explored there. But this morning, I'd like to suggest that instead of picking apart each and every line of the Exodus story, that we focus on the overall arc of the story itself. Karen Armstrong, the British author of many books on comparative religion, notes that we are meaning-seeking creatures. A myth, therefore, is true because it is effective, not because it gives us factual information. If, however, it does not give us new insight into the deeper meaning of life, it has failed. For Armstrong, the term myth is not derogatory, comparing myth with fact. A myth is merely a deeply held story that helps groups of people communicate their most deeply held values. The historical facts come second with myths because the values and beliefs are at the forefront. This distinction is perhaps made clear by this quote from the Jewish social justice activist Label Fine, who said, I don't know if Sinai happened, but I know I was there. And so it is with our Haggadah. Through the story that we will tell this weekend, gathered around our Seder tables, we are to tell it as if we were there. And through that telling, we are expressing our gratitude for having escaped Egypt. We're expressing the imperative to welcome the stranger. And we're expressing our unwavering belief that we shall overcome, some way, somehow, someday, no matter the obstacle. Despite the words of our story not changing, the telling of the story is different year after year because we are different, because the world is different each and every year. And maybe, this year in particular, it feels as though so much has changed since we told this epic story just 1 year ago. 1 year ago, we had not witnessed all of the drama and turmoil of the United States presidential election. 1 year ago, although the war in Gaza was raging onward, we had not yet welcomed home many of the hostages, or known about the status of the Bibas family, or learned the tragic story of Hirsch Goldberg Poland being killed. 1 year ago, many more Palestinians were alive, even amidst dire circumstances in Gaza. And 1 year ago, we had not known, although many had predicted, the extent to which the current administration in this country would utterly and dangerously disrupt our lives. Alongside the shifts in our world, we are different than 1 year ago. We have started new jobs and found new passions. We have lost loved ones and gained loved ones. We have experienced any number of things that will make the telling of the Passover story this year different for us and for the people gathered around our Seder table. And so, the question for us this morning and for the next week of Passover is, what is the story that we will tell ourselves and our loved ones about this time in the history of the world? We could tell the story of Mitzrayim, of the narrow place. In the beginning of our Passover story, Pharaoh claims that the Israelites had grown too numerous and that they might ally themselves with other nations against Egypt. Therefore, they must be destroyed. This fear-based myth expresses the values of Pharaoh in Egypt at the time: fear and scarcity of the unknown, leading to domination at all costs. There is a similar story being spread today, that we have much to fear from immigrants seeking a better life here, or that we are made weaker from diversity, equity, and inclusion, or that many individuals must suffer in order to support the riches of the few. So yes, we could tell this story, this myth that certainly expresses the values of a part of our country. But we would do so with the Mitzrayim mindset, the narrow place dictating this story. But we could also tell a different story. We could tell the story of a people and a place that passionately welcomes and defends immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers exactly because we were once strangers in the land of Egypt. We could tell the story of a people and a place that knows that diversity in all its forms makes us stronger, because we know that in Erev Rav, a mixed multitude that we read in Torah went out of Egypt alongside the Israelites. We could tell the story of a people and a place that understands that all of us deserve a life of dignity, because we know the difference between the degradation of enslavement in Egypt and the liberation that comes with the Promised Land. We can tell a different story. And perhaps the telling of that story can start with us, each of us, and our loved ones tonight and throughout the week, telling the story again, but this time with new eyes, with new ears, with new minds, and with new hearts. I'll close this morning with the words of political philosopher Michael Walzer. Standing on the parted shores, we still believe what we were taught before ever we stood at Sinai's foot, that wherever we go, it is eternally Egypt, that there is a better place, a promised land, that the winding way to that promise passes through the wilderness, that there is no way to get from here to there except by joining hands and marching together. May our telling of the story inspire us to keep marching all together, hand in hand, until we reach that sacred, shining, beautiful promised land. B'shana haba'a b'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. Chag Sameach, Shabbat Shalom.